Formula 1 in recent times has been a bit one-sided. Lewis Hamilton has won the last 4 championships in a row, and Mercedes have won the last 7 Constructors' Championships in a row. So I thought I'd have a look back over the 9 times that the F1 Championship was won by a single point. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. 1958, Mike Hawthorne. We first take a trip back to 1958, when Mike Hawthorne won the championship by a single point ahead of Stirling Moss. The era is back when the Indy 500 was part of the World Championship, and reliability was so poor that the final championship points were awarded for the driver's best 6 races from the 11-round season. The season was hotly contested and came down to the last round in Morocco. By the end of the season, Hawthorne in the Ferrari took 42 points, with Moss in the Vanwall car taking 41 points. But the breakdown of their results is even more interesting. Hawthorne's best 6 results included a win and 5 second places, but Moss's best 6 included 4 wins, a second place and a retirement. So given the point structure at the time, Hawthorne took the championship. It's also worth noting that had all points been counted, Hawthorne would have ended up on 49 to Moss's 41. So reliability really hampered Stirling Moss's chances in 1958. 1961, Phil Hill. Next up is the tragic story of 1961, where Phil Hill took the championship from Wolfgang von Trips. The pair were teammates at Ferrari, but it was the penultimate race in Italy that the two drivers would go head to head to fight it out for the championship. Prior to the race, von Trips was leading Hill by 33 points to 29. However, the race at Monza saw one of the worst crashes in Formula 1 history, as Wolfgang von Trips and Jim Clark collided at the Parabolica. Sadly, Von Trips lost his life along with 14 spectators, one of the worst incidents in the history of motor racing. Despite the tragedy, the race continued, with Hill going on to win the race and take the championship from Von Trips. With the Constructors' Championship wrapped up, the Ferrari team decided not to travel to the final round in the USA, which meant that over the season, Phil Hill took 2 wins, a couple of second positions, and a 3rd place finish, while Wolfgang von Trips also took 2 wins, a couple of second positions and a 4th position, meaning he just lost out by 34 points to 33. 1964, John Surtees. Moving on to 1964, where John Surtees won the championship in a Ferrari at the final race of the season from Graham Hill in the BRM. The 10-round season once again only counted a driver's best 6, but the first time in this list, the 2nd place finisher, Graham Hill, technically scored more points than the eventual champion John Surtees across the whole season. Both drivers took 2 wins and 3 second place finishes, but Surtees had that extra podium finish with a 3rd place in Britain, with Hill only taking a 4th place finish. However, Hill's best non-counting result was a 5th place in Belgium, whereas Surtees failed to finish the other 4 races. 1976, James Hunt. Next up, we go to 1976. Where for the first time it wasn't a Ferrari driver that won the championship by a single point. Instead, James Hunt in the McLaren won the championship from Niki Lauda in the Ferrari. Now this season is notable anyway, as Lauda suffered a horrifying crash at the Nürburgring, during which the Austrian driver was trapped in his car whilst engulfed in flames. He suffered from scarring as a result of the burns to his head, but in a remarkable recovery, Lauda only ended up missing 2 races and returned to the grid 6 weeks later, with his burns still in bandages from the incident. During Lauda's absence, Hunt started to claw back some points in the championship, winning in Germany and the Netherlands and taking a 4th place in Austria. The point setup was again slightly odd compared to today, as a driver's best 7 results from the first 8 races and best 7 results from the second 8 races would count towards the championship. For both Hunt and Lauda, they had both at least 1 retirement in both sets of 8 races, so this didn't have an impact on the final championship scores. And going into the final race in Japan, Hunt was on 65 points to Lauda's 68. And Hunt managed to take 3rd place whilst Lauda retired, meaning Hunt ended up on 69 points, just 1 ahead of Lauda. It was a season of 2 halves, as Lauda was dominant through the first half, and the resurgent Hunt came back just to snatch the championship victory at the final race of the season. The rivalry between the 2 drivers has been well documented, with popular films like Rush being made to document the rivalry. Just before I get into the next championship victory, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to those who subscribed in the last few days. The channel growth has been incredible. If you haven't yet subscribed, then please consider doing so. I've got loads more F1 content to come in the run up to the 2021 season and beyond. Thanks. 1981, Nelson Piquet. Next up is Nelson Piquet in the Brabham car, who won the championship by a single point in 1981 from Carlos Reutemann in the Williams car. The 15-race season had perhaps the most familiar point system of all the seasons so far, as all races counted and the top 6 finishers of each race scored points. But one thing to note of the 1981 season was that it started and finished with races in the USA. The first at Long Beach, and the closing race of the season happening in the car park of the Caesars Palace Hotel in Las Vegas. A really odd setting for a Grand Prix, let alone the last race of the season. Going into that final race, Reutemann was leading on 49 points with 2 race wins, as Piquet was just behind on 48 points with 3 race wins. Reutemann took pole at the Caesars Palace Grand Prix, but fell back to 8th in the race, whereas Piquet managed to come home in 5th position, taking just enough points to end up 1 ahead of the Argentine driver on 50. Now the next season in this list should be Niki Lauda's championship victory in 1984, but there's something special about that one, so I'm going to save it for the end of the video. Stay tuned to see what happened in that season. 1994, Michael Schumacher. Moving into the 90s now, and Michael Schumacher's first championship victory in 1994. And what a controversial championship it was, as Schumacher led the Williams driver of Damon Hill by that 1-point margin going into the final race in Adelaide. And it was during that final race that while leading, Schumacher made a mistake, colliding with the wall whilst Hill was closing him down. At the next turn, with the German driver still recovering from his mistake, Hill dived down the inside, and the two collided once Schumacher turned into the corner. The German driver immediately retired, with Hill retiring to the pits shortly after with damaged suspension. The stewards determined the crash to be a racing incident, but it still remains highly controversial today. It was also a season that had a number of controversial moments, including disqualifications for Schumacher at the British Grand Prix for overtaking Hill on the formation lap and then not serving his stop-go penalty in time, for which the driver received a 2-race ban. In addition, at the Belgian Grand Prix, Schumacher finished in first place on track, but was subsequently disqualified again as his Benetton car had excessive wear on his skid block. So, after 2 disqualifications, 2 races missed through a ban, and also a retirement for the German driver going into that final race, it was actually quite impressive that he was in a position to win the championship. It shows how impressive the rest of his season had been. The year ended with Schumacher on 92 points to Hill's 91, with the German achieving 8 race victories and 2 second place finishes to Hill's 6 race victories and 5 second place finishes. 2007, Kimi Raikkonen. Moving into the 2 championships that were decided by 1 point during the 21st century now, and we have Kimi Raikkonen's 2007 championship win for Ferrari. And for the first time on this list, it was actually 2 drivers that were within a point of the Finnish drivers' total. Before the final Grand Prix in Sao Paulo, it was the rookie Lewis Hamilton that was leading on 107 points, 4 ahead of his teammate Fernando Alonso, and Kimi Raikkonen was a further 3 points behind on just 100. So given at the time the point system awarded 10 for first position, unlike the current system where the first place driver gets 25, going into the Grand Prix, Raikkonen was a bit of an outsider. In the race, Raikkonen overtook Hamilton early on, as the Brit was then also passed by Alonso. Hamilton then subsequently suffered from a gearbox issue, which dropped him further down the field. Meanwhile, Raikkonen was running in second position behind his teammate Felipe Massa, with Alonso behind him. Raikkonen then leapfrogged his teammate to inherit the lead through the second round of pit stops, which then meant that Raikkonen was in prime position to take the win and the championship. And he did so, ending up on 110 championship points, with Hamilton and Alonso ending up on 109, the former taking second place in the championship on second place countback. It was a race that was full of action and suspense, and it was the first time that 3 drivers had been in contention at the final race since 1986. 2008, Lewis Hamilton. F1 fans didn't need to wait long though for another championship that was decided by a single point, as it happened the very next season, with Hamilton taking the championship victory by a single point over Felipe Massa. Once again, the closing race of the season came in Brazil, where going into the race, Hamilton was leading the championship on 94 points, with Massa behind on 87. The gap meant that the Brazilian driver would need to win the race, with the British driver finishing 6th or lower. It was a tense final battle in mixed conditions in Sao Paulo, as the start of the race was delayed by a heavy thunderstorm, which meant the race started on a wet track. Early on in the race, the track dried up, with all cars switching to dry tyres by lap 11. But towards the end of the Grand Prix, rain started to fall again, which triggered a number of drivers and teams to switch back to the intermediate tyres. Hamilton and Vettel were battling for 4th position, which then became 5th as Timo Glock stayed out on dry tyres. In a chaotic final lap, when Felipe Massa had already crossed the line to claim the race win, Hamilton was desperately trying to get past Sebastian Vettel for 5th position. But then the two drivers both passed Timo Glock at the final corner to ensure that Hamilton had done just enough to take the championship. It was a historic race that was definitely one that you could re-watch over and over again, and it meant that Hamilton took the championship by a single point with 98 to Massa's 97. 1984, Niki Lauda. I left this race to the end of the video, as on this occasion the World Championship was not won by a single point, but actually by half a point by the end of the season. The battle was between Niki Lauda and Alain Prost across the 16-race season. Earlier in the season at Monaco, only half points were awarded to the drivers as the race was red flagged under heavy rain conditions. It meant that Prost only took 4.5 points from the race, as opposed to the 9 that he would have taken for the race victory. Coming into the final race in the season, in Portugal, Niki Lauda led the championship on 66, with Prost behind on 62.5. The Austrian driver needed to finish 2nd position or better to take the title, which he did, while the Frenchman won the race. It was an unbelievably close season, and I doubt we'll ever see anything quite like that again. So, there are the 9 occasions where the F1 World Championship was won by a single point or less. It was a bit of a different style video for me this time around, so if you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more F1 content in the future.